The Maple Ridge Animal Shelter stood at the edge of town, a squat brick building surrounded by a chain-link fence, its weathered sign barely legible under the gray drizzle of a Tuesday afternoon. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of wet fur and disinfectant, punctuated by the restless barks and whines of dogs craving attention. Sarah Thompson, the receptionist, sat behind a cluttered desk, her fingers tapping idly on a clipboard, listing the shelter's residents. She'd been there 3 years, long enough to memorize the rhythm of the place. Mornings filled with hopeful families, afternoons with stragglers seeking specific breeds. Most asked for puppies, their eyes drawn to the bouncing bundles of fur in the front cages. Sarah's smile was practiced, warm but efficient, ready for the usual question. "What puppies do you have today?" The doorbell chimed, a sharp note, cutting through the cacophony. Sarah looked up, her smile in place as a man stepped inside. He was tall, his frame lean under a worn leather jacket, his boots leaving faint mud tracks on the linoleum. His face, lined with quiet resolve, carried an intensity that made Sarah's smile falter. His gray eyes scanned the room, not lingering, on the colorful posters of happy adoptions or the donation jar by the door. He approached the desk with purpose, hands stuffed deep in his pockets as if bracing for something. "Welcome to Maple Ridge Animal Shelter," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the odd energy he brought. "How can I help you today?" The man leaned forward, his voice low but unwavering. "I want to adopt your most hated dog." The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the noisy shelter. Sarah blinked, her mind stumbling over the request. In all her time here, no one had ever asked for anything so specific. The shelter was a place of second chances, where dogs were marketed as loyal companions or playful pals. But most hated? The phrase didn't belong here. "Excuse me?" she asked, leaning closer, certain she'd misheard. The man's expression didn't shift. "I want the dog no one wants," he repeated. "The one who's been here the longest, the one nobody asks about." His tone was firm, not a request but a demand, yet there was no arrogance in it, just a quiet certainty. He didn't mention breeds, ages, or behaviors. He wasn't here for a golden retriever puppy or a well-trained lab. He wanted the forgotten, the overlooked, the one every visitor passed by without a second glance. Sarah's fingers tightened on her clipboard, her eyes flicking to the list of dogs. Most were recent arrivals, puppies with "Adopt Me" tags, or older dogs with charming quirks. But she knew exactly who he meant. Her stomach twisted at the thought. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice softer now, almost cautious. "We have a lot of great dogs here, ones that are easier to connect with." "I'm sure," he said, his gaze steady. "Show me." Sarah hesitated, then nodded, setting the clipboard down. "Follow me," she said, leading him through the narrow hallway lined with cages. The dogs erupted as they passed, some leaping against the bars, others whining for attention. Each cage bore a tag, names, ages, adoption statuses, some adorned with crude drawings of smiling faces. The man didn't look at them. His focus was ahead, as if he already knew where this journey would end. They reached the back corner of the shelter, where the noise faded and the light dimmed. A single cage sat against the wall, as if tucked away to be forgotten. Inside, on the cold concrete floor, lay a large German shepherd. His fur was patchy, his ribs faintly visible beneath dull, matted coat. His eyes, once perhaps bright, were clouded with resignation. He didn't move, didn't bark, didn't even lift his head as they approached. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "This is Max. He's been here almost 2 years. Came in with signs of abuse, scars, malnourishment. He growls sometimes, doesn't trust people. Honestly, we stopped trying to find him a home." The man crouched, his knees creaking as he lowered himself to Max's level. The dog's head lifted slightly, his eyes meeting the man's. There was no wagging tail, no spark of hope, just a weary acknowledgement of another human who would likely walk away. Sarah watched, expecting the man to reconsider, to ask for a friendlier dog, but he didn't. "I'll take him," he said, standing up, his voice as firm as before. "Are you sure?" Sarah asked, her brows knitting together. "He's not easy. He might never be." "Absolutely," the man said, nodding. "This is the dog I came for." Sarah exhaled, a mix of disbelief and admiration. She handed him the paperwork, her hands trembling slightly. As she watched him sign, she wondered what drove him to choose Max. Was it pity, a challenge, or something deeper, something she couldn't yet understand? Whatever it was, Max was leaving the shelter today, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was beginning. The man's home was a modest bungalow on the outskirts of Maple Ridge, its faded blue paint blending into the overcast sky. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and old wood, with mismatched furniture and a few framed photos of distant mountains. The man, whose name was Daniel, had prepared for Max a dog bed in the corner, a bowl of water, a bag of kibble from the shelter's recommendations. But Max, the German shepherd who had spent 2 years in a cage, wasn't ready for this new world. The journey from the shelter had been a battle. Max had frozen at the sound of passing cars, his body rigid with fear. He refused to enter Daniel's old pickup truck, his hackles raised as if the vehicle were a threat. Daniel, patient but firm, spoke in low, soothing tones, coaxing Max with gentle tugs on the leash. It took nearly 20 minutes, but Max finally climbed into the back seat, curling into the farthest corner, his eyes fixed on the door. His body trembled, a leaf caught in an unseen storm as Daniel drove home through the drizzle. At the house, Max's fear didn't ease. He ignored the dog bed, the water, the food. Instead, he found the laundry room, a cramped space with a linoleum floor and a faint hum from the washer, and curled up in the corner, his back pressed against the wall. Daniel tried to lure him out with treats, but Max's eyes remained distant, haunted by ghosts only he could see. That first night, Daniel sat on the floor nearby, not too close, and said nothing. He just waited, his presence a quiet promise. For days, Max barely moved. He refused food, his water bowl untouched. At night, he didn't sleep, his eyes glinting in the dark as he stared at shadows. Daniel tried different approaches, soft words, slow movements, even leaving the radio on low to fill the silence. Nothing worked. Max was a fortress, his walls built from years of pain. Daniel, undeterred, spent hours in the laundry room, sometimes reading a book, sometimes just sitting. He didn't push, didn't demand trust. He simply existed alongside Max, letting the dog set the pace. On the 5th night, something shifted. Daniel was sitting cross-legged on the floor, a cup of cold coffee in hand when Max's nose brushed his knuckles. It was fleeting, barely a touch, but it stopped Daniel's breath. Max retreated immediately, curling back into his corner, but the moment lingered. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall, a sign that Max was beginning to see Daniel as something other than a threat. By the 7th day, Max took his first real step. Daniel was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for a stew when he heard the soft click of claws on the hardwood. Max stood at the threshold, his body low, eyes darting. He didn't come closer, but he didn't retreat either. Daniel kept his movements slow, his voice calm as he placed a bowl of kibble on the floor. Max watched, hesitant, then took a single step forward. He sniffed the air, then the food, and finally ate, a few tentative bites, but enough to call it progress. Each day brought small victories. Max began to explore beyond the laundry room, his steps cautious but deliberate. He lingered in doorways watching Daniel's routines, morning coffee, evening news, the quiet hum of a life that was now his to share. Daniel never rushed him, never raised his voice. He understood that Max's world had been shattered long ago, and rebuilding it would take time. The shelter had called Max broken, but Daniel saw something else. A dog learning to live again, one hesitant step at a time. 2 weeks into Max's new life, the bungalow began to feel less like a prison. The laundry room was no longer his only refuge. One evening, as Daniel watched an old Western on the living room TV, Max appeared at the edge of the carpet. His ears twitched at the sound of galloping hooves on the screen, but he didn't retreat. He stood, wary but curious, his eyes no longer hidden behind a veil of pain. Daniel kept still, pretending not to notice, letting Max decide his next move. The dog didn't sit, didn't relax, but he stayed, a silent victory. Max's progress was slow but steady. He began eating regularly, no longer waiting for Daniel to leave the room. The kibble bowl, once ignored, was now emptied daily, and Max even drank from the water bowl without flinching at Daniel's presence. One morning, Daniel woke to a sight that stopped his heart. Max, curled up at the foot of his bed, sleeping. It wasn't a joyful sprawl, not yet, but it was the first time Max had chosen to be close. His chest rose and fell with steady breaths, and for the first time Daniel saw peace in the dog's face. The real test came when a neighbor, Clara, knocked on the door unannounced. Max's ears shot up, his body tensing. Daniel opened the door and Clara, a chatty woman with a basket of homemade muffins, stepped inside. Max didn't hide. Instead, he barked, a low, rumbling sound that wasn't fear but instinct. He positioned himself between Daniel and Clara, his tail low, ears tense. Clara froze, but Daniel smiled, his chest swelling with pride. "It's okay, Max," he said softly. Max's barks quieted, but he stayed in place, a guardian finding his role. Daniel began to see Max not as broken, but as a dog rebuilding himself. The shelter had given up on him, but Max was proving them wrong. He started following Daniel around the house, his steps less hesitant, his eyes brighter. He'd linger in the kitchen during meals, watching Daniel with a mix of caution and curiosity. At night, he'd lie closer to the couch, not quite touching but near enough to feel the warmth of Daniel's presence. The walls Max had built were cracking, and through those cracks a new dog was emerging, one with strength, loyalty, and a spark of courage. Maple Ridge was a small town, its streets lined with maple trees and modest homes, but on a rainy Wednesday, it was gripped by panic. Lucas Miller, a 10-year-old boy, had been missing for 3 days. Search parties combed the woods. Volunteers called his name, and posters with his smiling face dotted every lamppost. Daniel felt the town's fear, a heavy weight in the air, as he walked Max in the backyard. Max, now more at ease, trotted beside him, his tail occasionally flicking. Then, without warning, Max froze. His ears shot up and a loud, sharp bark erupted from his throat. It wasn't his usual protective rumble. This was frantic, urgent. He paced back and forth, his eyes wild with worry. Daniel called his name, but Max ignored him, barking louder, his voice echoing through the drizzle. Neighbors peeked out, drawn by the commotion. Max suddenly bolted, his leash slipping from Daniel's hand, and ran down the street. Daniel chased after him, heart pounding, as a crowd formed, curious and anxious. Max's steps were determined, his tail raised, leading them through Maple Ridge's winding roads. He didn't hesitate, didn't slow, his instincts guiding him toward the town's outskirts. The crowd grew, their murmurs blending with the rain, as Max raced toward an abandoned warehouse, its windows boarded, its walls crumbling. Max stopped at the entrance, sniffing the air, then barked again, his voice piercing the silence. Daniel caught up, breathless, as the crowd gathered. Inside, they found Lucas, unconscious on the cold ground but breathing. Paramedics were called and the boy was rushed to the hospital. Max's relentless barks had led them to him, saving a life. The crowd stood in awe, their whispers turning to cheers. Max, the dog no one wanted, had become a hero. News of Max's heroism spread like wildfire through Maple Ridge. By morning, local newspapers ran headlines: "Rejected dog saves missing child," and "German Shepherd hero rescues." Lucas. Reporters crowded Daniel's doorstep, cameras flashing as Max sat beside him, his eyes bright but wary. The shelter, once a place of despair for Max, became a pilgrimage site, with visitors asking to see where the hero dog had lived. Sarah, the receptionist, recounted the story of Max's adoption with tears in her eyes, marveling at how the man's unlikely request had changed everything. Daniel remained quiet, deflecting praise to Max. He knew the dog's strength had always been there, buried under years of pain, waiting for someone to believe in him. Max now walked with confidence, his tail raised, his coat slowly regaining its sheen. He greeted neighbors with cautious curiosity, no longer hiding from the world. At home, he slept by Daniel's side, his presence a steady comfort. The town saw Max differently now, not as a broken dog but as a symbol of redemption. Children drew pictures of him, and the shelter started a Max Fund for other forgotten dogs. Max's story became a beacon, proving that even the most overlooked could change the world. On quiet nights, as Daniel and Max sat together, the dog's head resting on his knee, Daniel knew they'd saved each other. Max wasn't just a hero, he was home.